Yo. Okay. All right. So this is going to be like a more long and loose sort of thing. I've done a lot of research into the past, I guess, couple of days just on this topic. And I just wanted to talk to a few people about it because I think a lot will get some useful information out of it. So share this. See if we can get some people coming down. Most of y'all are going to be asleep, but I don't want to record this US time. Give me 1 second. Alrighty. So we'll see if we get anyone coming in. If not, no worries. We'll just upload this as a video. So what I wanted to talk about was a little bit of research I've been doing over the last few weeks. Been doing this for a long time, but mainly looking more into the psychology of specific things. Now, we're going to run through all of these things just because most people find it super interesting. And a lot of people will find it themselves doing specific things. And if you really want to take sports betting or sports investing seriously, you just can't have these issues, which are 99% of the time going to be cognitive bias related. Now, if you're not sure what cognitive bias means, it's basically if I place a bet and whatever the outcome, I'm making a decision based on a predetermined bias that I have. There's tons of different ones that are related to sports betting, but today we're going to go through a few of the most common ones. So the most common one of all time is the gambler's fallacy. So that's where if a specific pattern is happening, it will continue into the future because I think it will, right? Now, this is very common in things like roulette, like even sports betting to a certain extent. If a team's winning, they'll win the next time. But then you can get into talking about things like momentum, which does have an impact. So we're going to stick to pretty black and white ones for the start. So gambler's fallacy is just if a specific action continues happening. So let's say we're talking about a coin flip and we're saying, okay, it's been heads 9 times in a row. Over 50% of the population will say that the next one will be heads or will be tails. So they'll say, okay, well, it's been heads 9 times. It can't be heads again, right? And when you extrapolate this out into a betting environment or a investing environment, you get into a very, very dangerous sort of cognitive bias, which is the gambler's fallacy. There's also a couple more that these are kind of more of the stupid ones, but personal attributes. So when people think they're lucky or when people think, oh, I need to have my lucky socks on or something to make plays, come on, like, what the fuck? We're trying to make real money here. Like, you having your fucking lucky pants on ain't going to make a difference. That's just a few things to be aware of. Obviously, most of the people who work with us and follow us, that aren't beginner bettors. So you'll be relatively aware of that, but just something for starters to realize. The next one is emotion. So emotions play a massive part when you start losing. Like, you will always go through a losing stage in a season, go through a losing stage in a sport, go through a losing stage in life, if you want to play that card. But how you react to that and whether you decide to play a chase or whether you decide to have a process in place is the main difference. So, for example, if you have a process in place about how you make plays, so we look at this data, we look at starting goalies, teams, injuries, coach comments, we look at this. The more you have that in a process that is a model or algorithmic based, the stronger your overall edge and your outcome for the specific decision will be. The more things you have from a gut point of view or I'm a traditional handicapper, I don't need these things, that's where you get into a lot of issues around emotion. And that brings us on to kind of one of the worst types of biases, which is the randomness or outcome bias. So this one is super interesting. So this is also called the hindsight bias. So I'm just reading a little bit. This is the number one reason why people lose a bunch of money, because what they'll say is okay, if I make a bet and I win that bet. So let's say we make a play on the NHL and that team wins, we make 1 unit, 2 units profit, whatever it is. Now we've won that because of our skill. Now that's the assumption that will be made, the outcome bias. Now if that loses, right, that's because of we were unlucky, or the other team was lucky, or it was some element of variance. Very few people will call it variance, but they're essentially saying that it's not our fault. We didn't lack the skill in the selection was the reason we lost. The reason we lost was because of we were unlucky. And that's the main problem, because a lot of people will create processes or create systems, or even just, think they're amazing at gambling because of that variance and that skill. So the outcome bias is what it's called. And it basically is very, very dangerous. In my opinion, it's one of the biggest ones where you see beginner to intermediate gamblers, when they start making a couple of units a month and they've solved their bankroll management and they've solved their selection process, they start drawing lines that aren't there. Okay. So they start having correlation and causation, and they don't understand the difference. So causation, if X and Y happens, what Z outcome will happen? Okay. So if a team in the last game did X and the opposition in the last game did Y, then when they play each other, the result should be Z. Now that's a very oversimplified version, but you get the idea. That's fine, because that's causation. And whatever happens, you can reverse engineer it as if that was the outcome. And obviously the more X, Y, Z elements that you have, so if you have 100 inputs of data points and you have one, or say versus 1 million inputs of data points, 99% of the time, that 1 million inputs of data points is going to be a lot stronger because you just have more data. Like, however you extrapolate that out, it's more causation in. So the correlation is going to be stronger. But whereas if you just look at the outcome, you just look at the correlation and you put one data point in and say, okay, I think Colin McDavid is amazing, so that means I'm going to bet Oilers money line. It's, your causation is so minor that, thanks, Rahul. Your causation is so minor that it's just ridiculous. Like that 1 point might have actually been the reason. They might win a close game 3-2 or something, and it was because of a massive amount of skill. But that is one data point of so many others. And the more data points you can put in, and when I say data points, that doesn't need to be things like statistical analysis or data modeling. A data point could be something like, okay, well, LeBron James is playing today and Lakers are doing really well, but he posted something on Twitter about how his kid's ill, right? Now, this is where next level thinking in sports betting doesn't come in. But if his kid's ill, he's probably worried about that, right? And he's probably not sleeping, and sleep affects performance. So how far do you go down the rabbit hole? And if you're betting 25 grand a unit on a specific sporting event, then you best be sure that what you're betting on is correct. And if you build out these as models, you don't need to look at every team's Twitter feed or every team's sentiment analysis of each tweet, right? The goal we're trying to get to is to build an algorithm that will semi-automate this process for us. And with our team, we can build out the steps to do the other thing. But unless you understand what affects a specific outcome, the causation, you can never get to a correlation that you trust. And that's where a lot of people kind of go wrong. So hopefully that was explained all right. Then another one that I really find quite difficult is the selective memory. So there was a study called, I can't remember who it was by, but it was a selective recall study. And basically people in gambling industries, or mainly more casino, but also happens a lot in sports betting as well, they will remember their wins and forget their losses, right? So, okay, last season we made 40 units on the NHL, right? I can't remember off the top of my head what 2013-14 season was, right? I couldn't tell you. Probably because it was, first of all, not as good. And secondly, it was so long ago, which we'll get onto something in a second with the recency bias. But remembering wins and forgetting losses is really bad because you actually don't have an end point. So you're basically saying, okay, we made 10 bets and we won 5. Okay. Now, when you extrapolate that over a year and you're not tracking things in a spreadsheet or any tracking method, you might say, oh, we've won our last 5. But realistically, you have no idea what's going on because you're not tracking anything. So your bankroll management might be fine. And let's be honest, like if your account's going up, that kind of is the main thing. But if you have no idea what you're actually doing along the way, then your selective memory is going to be really kind of negatively affecting you. And even if you're aware of it, which is kind of why I'm doing this video in the first place, just to make people aware of all these things, you know, you need to be very careful of the whole remembering wins versus forgetting losses conversation. The next one is one of my favorites. There was a study done on confidence of bet. So I think it was a horse racing track. They had 100 professional punters around the world or around the country, and they asked them to place a bet. They asked them what they thought about a specific race and their degree of confidence. So they would say, okay, I think this horse is going to win this race. Okay, what's your degree of confidence? I think it has a 70% chance of winning, whatever. As soon as they placed that bet, their degree of confidence increased dramatically. So once they were, excuse me, once they were bought in to it, they actually somehow thought the horse was more likely to win. Does that make sense? So that's obviously utterly ridiculous because no causation elements have changed. You've added a bet. And, you know, as much as I bet on an NHL game, that doesn't change the outcome of the game. That's getting back to the emotional, I'm wearing my lucky socks bullshit. Like, you know, it doesn't have any effect, but this happens in the human mind. And if you're not aware of it, you might not be able to control it as well. So just be very careful of that. Okay. It's kind of called the confirmation bias as well. It's like a take on that. If we bet on this, then we should be more confident about it, but it doesn't actually change the in and out of the competition, especially if it's, you know, not even live in play. If it's a few hours before the game, then absolutely nothing has changed. Oh. Any questions so far? We got a couple of people watching. That's cool. I think everyone can post in the chat. Okay, so next point, the illusion of control. This is a funny one. So they did a research study on the score, no score. So it was basically a light that came on in a pretty like generic room. So just a white background. And they had a light that, cheers guys. And they had a light that basically came on and a button. So if I press a button and I'm looking at the light and there's a score, no score, right? And obviously they set it up and it was random, but they could tweak it. So if I press a button, it was 10% more likely to be score light or whatever. In short, people assumed what they were doing always had an effect. Okay. So this is a little bit back to causation versus correlation and also a little bit of like emotional triggers as well. So it also happens in craps as well. So when you're rolling a dice, if you want higher numbers, you'll roll the dice harder. Okay. Just obviously psychology, but absolutely nothing to do with the outcome. Like a dice doesn't have more chance of obviously landing on a 6 if you roll it harder, right? It's the exact same chance or, you know, marginally different. So that point of view as well is just, you think you're having effect on something when in fact you're really not. Sports betting, I think we're obviously relatively calm when it comes to this because we all know that, you know, if we're watching an event and we think something, you know, I would hope most of my followers are not, you know, that beginner level to think what they think actually changes an outcome. But you can also take that to a higher level. So did XYZ that did affect a specific sporting event change the outcome of it? Now, I'm doing a little bit of testing on things like this, and it's quite an awkward subject to talk about because you have to take out tragic events as a major determiner. So like if you remember the Boston Marathon bombings, and the Boston Bruins game after was very, very passionate and sort of, it's just very hyped up, like as you would expect. But the problem was they lost. and they didn't actually play all that well. And it's not because they didn't play hard. They would have, played harder. And they weren't playing like an incredible team either. I think they lost to the Panthers. But we've been looking at this data for a while, and obviously, luckily, there's not a lot of tragic events, so you can't really have a lot of data on it. But just because something bad happens and people get very hyped up about it, that doesn't make the result any more likely to occur. So this is kind of a weird one where an external factor that's so big, like a tragic event, won't actually have any impact on a specific game as much as the team might think it will. Because if the fans get hyped, for example, you have home advantage, which obviously is a thing, but determining that back to line value, is that already integrated into the line fully? Or if a tragic event happens and people know this team's going to be hyped up, can you be overhyped? Because obviously professional sport is autonomous solutions anyway. So people don't have to think about, shooting a hockey puck. They've done it a million times. So that doesn't actually change the process. So it's just something to be aware of. It's not so much a sort of bias, but it is a psychological factor. So we're going to keep an eye on it. And if anyone's interested, I'll try and get some data over to you. Another funny one is how 85% of people think they're above average. So, for example, if we had however many followers we have now, 350 range, if we asked all of them, do you think you're above average in proportion to the rest of the followers as a sports bettor, right? 85% of people would probably say yes, we are above average. Obviously, that's impossible. But you see that in all sorts of industries, right? Especially things that are very emotional or social based. So do you think you're a good communicator, or do you think you're a good writer, for example? Do you think you are better than, or do you think you're in the top 50% of all writers? Okay. Obviously, that's kind of a very difficult statement, and there are obviously better examples, but obviously 85% of people can't be above average. So just remember that. Do I think Thierry Henry taking over AS Monaco will make a big difference in March? Monaco has been struggling. I don't bet on a lot of soccer, I'm afraid. I just don't really look into it. Something we might get around to in the future, but not quite yet. Okay, so the next one is the sports betting and the near miss. So this is pulled out from roulette, actually. So let's say you bet on a number in roulette and you spin the wheel and it lands right next to your number. Okay. Now that's obviously a near miss, but it's still wrong, because if we take roulette as a game of chance, then 100% a game of chance, and we hit, say, we bet on 0 and it's right next to it. Okay. 26 or 32, I think, in the UK. That doesn't mean we were any closer or there was any more likelihood of our event happening. So if you take this back to a sporting event and you just look at correlation, you don't look at causation, and you say, okay, I think under 5.5 goals, right? And let's say the final score was 4-2, so we lost by half a goal. Most people will say that was really close, like we were unlucky to lose. And that's what you want to get away from a little bit, because that's the near miss principle. And that's a very, very extremely dangerous one, especially if you don't have any causation or data points. Because if you relate that back the other way and you say, okay, we won, so it was 3-2, and we had under 5.5, so we won a unit or we won that bet, then problem is, are you relating that back to data again, or are you just saying, no, skill, we won? And then you get back into the whole, okay, skill versus luck and outcome bias. So another thing to be super careful of. All right. Time and recency bias is another one. So if an event has happened in the relative past, we're more likely to have a favorable outcome on it. So for example, if I say, okay, I think Eagles are incredible because they just won their NFL game, right? I think they're going to win their next game. That doesn't really have an impact, especially if you bet that very early. That's why you get a lot of markets that open up straight away. So for example, the World Cup, soccer, football, World Cup just finished, a few months ago. There are a lot of people who have bet for the winner in the next 4 years because of the outcomes that have happened in that World Cup. Now, 4 years, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of shit can go down in 4 years. So, players can even die. Like, I'm not being funny, but things are going to change. So if you're betting that far in advance based on the recency bias, and you're saying, okay, well, Croatia were really good this year, or Germany were really bad, that means, you know, Croatia are more likely to win in 4 years' time. You have no idea half the players that are going to be even in that squad. So to do that is just kind of a bit stupid, in short, from a betting point of view anyway. Hype and media on betting lines. So this is something we're trying to build into our algorithm. It is quite tough because how do you sort of mold out sentiment analysis in the media? But if there's a lot of talk about how a specific team or a specific player, or usually a lot of managers as well, are kind of not doing very well or are potentially going to do amazing. So for example, if there's a lot of positive media and positive press and people on, you know, even CNN and stuff talking about a specific team or a manager, how he's going to turn this team around, that's going to cause that line to move just because the amount of dumb public money that goes on it. Now, most betting lines have to move in relation to the money that is put on, because obviously they still need to make a profit depending on whatever outcome it is. But hype and media lines, or hype and media, affect betting lines so much more than people think. And this is something that we're looking into at the moment. But it is something to remember. So if you're seeing a line move, so like, for example, the fight with Conor McGregor, if he starts at plus 180, yeah, okay, so the perfect example is when he fought Mayweather, and he started about 10 to 1 or whatever it was, but he eventually went down to 3 to 1. Now, that was only because of him creating his own hype and so much public money about him saying he's going to win, he's going to win, he's going to win. And the press saying he might win, you know, which obviously was probably 10 to 1 was the likelihood that that would happen. But it went all the way down to 3 to 1 or whatever it was. And that was only because of the hype in the media. There's so much public money because it was a large sporting event, a one-time event, you know, 100 million in fees and all this. It's just something that you need to keep an eye on. Media will fuck you up, in short. Couple more points. They're a little bit more generic, but they're towards the psychology of sort of long-term profit. So if you have an edge, right? An edge on a play. If you have a very tight edge, then you need to remember the large numbers. Cheers, man. You need to remember the large numbers over time principle. So if we have a 53% edge, right? Yeah, I know, right? It was just mental. I don't do a lot of UFC, guys, but I know a guy in the UK, in my city, who is huge. And yeah, he was just like, I don't have a fucking clue what's going on. But yeah, it happened recently as well. So basically, large numbers over time, I would rather make less plays, but have a larger edge, because you earn a lot more money in the long run than making a ton of plays, increasing your risk to variance, and having a 53% win rate, right? So just doing some maths here. If we say, let's just call it an evens line, just because I can't be bothered to maths at this time in the morning. If it's 53% on evens, right? So that means out of 100 bets, we win 53, we lose 47, so we're up 6 units, right? Obviously, 100 bets, and to only be up 6 units, you know, we're up 6 units on 25 bets in the NHL already. Like, it's just not worth the amount of time and effort to build it out. Marginal increases is a good point. So if you can say, okay, we can build out a model that is semi-automated, and we know that the marginal increase on specific things will happen. So for example, if we say, okay, we've built out a model that analyzes, not NFL, MLB games, for example, and we know where the lines are weak or strong, then we could take all of those over the season, because that would be enough data to make, you know, 100 plays a week. And then that's 6 units a week over the course of an MLB season, which makes it worthwhile. But for the most part, you want to have larger sort of edges of, say, if you have an edge of 60%, but you can only play 50 plays, yeah? So 60, 40, 10, you still end up at 10 units profit instead of only 6 after 50 plays instead of 100. And obviously finding an edge of 60% versus 53% might sound scary, but it's honestly not that hard. You just would have to have less plays. So we bet on a lot of rugby in the UK and a lot of cricket. And the edges you can get on those games, because they're just not managed as well by betting companies, and their lines are just, because the volume of bets is so small, they don't invest a lot of money into tracking the lines. That is kind of like the main thing. So large numbers over time versus edge of play, it's kind of like a big decision you have to make. So am I going to be the best NHL, or is someone going to be the best NFL player or the best NFL gambler? Because if you are, then you have to realize that you don't have a massive amount of plays each season. So you need to be right most of the time. Whereas if you're going to be a very good MLB bettor, you only need a slight edge and you can actually make a lot of money. And that's, in short, why you see a lot of MLB guys who do okay will make 25, 30 units a season relatively easily. Because if it's streamlined enough, you can just do, you know, data analysis and modeling, and times by the sheer number of games on, you know, let's be honest, not on ice, in short, it's a lot easier. The variance is a lot lower because essentially you have 1-on-1 as an initial contact, the pitcher versus the batsman. So yeah, you have 1-on-1 as initial contact, and then you can add all your data points in around that. And there's a good book on that. It's the Moneyball Theory with the Oakland team. Can't remember the exact things. It was years ago I read that, but good book, good read. Then a few more things. Decide on your goal, because there's a few really interesting ones coming up as well. I've just got notes in another tab. Decide on your goals, because a lot of people will say, what really annoys me is people will work in a job. Maybe they earn a really good amount of money. Let's say they're on $500,000 a year, or let's just say 100K a year for math's sake. And they'll say, okay, I'm going to save up and invest this into real estate or invest this into the stock market. And okay, if you spend, let's say you invest 20K a year into the stock market or real estate and you make 5% a year, because you're starting from so low, you're going to be dead before you see good returns, right? So if you really want to decide on your goals and you want to say, okay, I want to make 100K a year through sports betting so I can live anywhere in the world, I can do whatever I want, I can travel, I can chill with my family, you know, 22 hours a day, and the other 2 hours a day I look at some data modeling, I find the right people to follow, and I put some bets on the best lines, right? The guys in the US, I mean, there's advantages to being in the UK as well, but the main one of which we don't get taxed on betting profits. But you guys in the US that have Pinnacle, I look at these Pinnacle lines and I'm just so jealous. Like, they're incredible. You guys should be making fucking 40 units a season on any sport you decide, just from some simple data modeling. Excuse me. Any questions about anything? Where's everyone from? Oh, Germany. Cool. Yeah. Whereabouts in Germany are you from? Yeah, oh, nice. Berlin's nice. I've looked into the geo restrictions, but if anyone has anyone that they recommend to use, I'm happy to try another one. But the ones that were recommended via Twitter didn't work in the end. They didn't have UK for Pinnacle, essentially. And I am a little bit worried because obviously I don't want to invest a few grand into opening the account, win a few grand, and then them say, you know, we can't send it to you. That would be a bit shit. But if anyone knows any good ways of using Pinnacle, because I even love their content marketing. My background is from that, so it's cool. Yeah. Okay. So deciding your goals, I'm huge on this because, like, as soon as you phrase your mindset and you think bigger, if somebody came to me and said, look, I'm earning 40K a year, but what I want to do is really earn 40K a year from gambling. In 2 years, you could do that. You could transition your job income into sports betting income, 100%. Now, the thing is, how to do that, you wouldn't want to put the work in, but it is possible, okay? So just relate that back to your goals, okay? And we're going to talk about something really cool now, but And this is like the main reason why people kind of suck and don't think long-term with gambling, or I don't like calling it gambling, but or sports betting or sports investing, whatever you want to call it. So unit sizing is obviously really important. You've heard me harp on about this for potentially years now. Let's say if we start with a unit size of £100 or $100, right? And we do really well in a season. And then next season, we're like, earn some money from elsewhere as well. So we're like, okay, we're going to increase our unit size to $1,000 or £1,000. The problem here is if you decide to do this, you can never go back to $100. Okay. So that's a kind of gambling psychology element. You physically can't go backwards because it messes with your mind. If you've lost, say, 10 grand through betting $100 a unit, the amount of time it would take to get back to, if you've lost, say, 20 grand betting $1,000 a unit, and you're like, shit, I've lost too much money, I need to go back down to $100 a unit, the amount of time it will take to do that and re-earn back that 20 grand will mess with your head. So that's where you get people chasing, and they're like, oh, well, I can't afford to go back down to a unit size that's smaller than $1,000 a unit, even though I started on $100 1 year ago. Right. And that's the tough psychology part of it. And that's why you really need to be careful with bankroll management from the very start. And it doesn't matter the amount, which is what I obviously talk about a lot. It doesn't matter if you start with a £10 unit, just make sure you start with something that you know you can have at least 50 units of in a betting account. So if it's £10 a unit, then obviously, get your £500, take the best odds you can, work it around, and just increase it slowly. There's multiple ways of increasing unit size. There's even statistical ones as well, like Fibonacci or Kelly criterion as well. Or you can just do simple. All I've done from the start is just increase it proportional to my income and increase it proportional to my success and risk. So depending on how many plays a week you make as well. So some models will, or some people that you see that say they lay like 10 units a day on specific events, that's a bit stupid in my book, because if you were a portfolio manager and you said, okay, I'm risking 10% of our hedge fund equity on these 10 separate events, you would just be fired. It's ridiculous. And people just don't understand that if you are going to do bankroll management, how we talk about it, so 1% maximum are played, or 2% maximum if you're kind of careful, it is super maximum as well, then don't take that and extrapolate that to other people's systems. So if you're following us and you're doing 1 to 2% max, that's fine, because that's what we use. So that's all good. If you go in and doing that for somebody else that lays 10, 15 units a day, you can have 20% of your entire bankroll on one day. That's terrible. Okay. Just something to be aware of. But remember that once you increase your unit size, it's super difficult to go the other way, because it just makes it catching up or chasing so much more difficult. And that's actually a major problem when you see people in poker games and even roulette and stuff. They don't want to go backwards. So if you're playing blackjack, you have, let's say, $100 on each hand, and you win some, you lose some, whatever, it doesn't matter. The chance of you increasing that to $200, $500, say $1,000, the excitement you'll get from that and the buzz and everything, why most people do gambling in the first place, is too large to go back down to 100. Because either way, let's say you lose loads of money, so you have to go, so you have to go down, right? You're going to be like, well, this is stupid. I was just betting $1,000 a hand, and now I'm only betting $100 a hand. Or even just say smaller stakes, $100 a hand versus £2 a hand, or $2 a hand. You're going to be like, well, I'm going to have to win 50 hands in a row to even get 1 unit back. And that's going to mess so much with your mind, you cannot imagine. So never go backwards. And also from an investing principle, if you want to sort of hit the million in 5 years from sports betting, then you can't afford to go backwards. And this also relates back to delayed gratification. So this is something I talk a lot about with the business people I'm involved with. The principle of delayed gratification, you should Google it, because I could rant about this for 4 hours. But delayed gratification, in short, is doing something that you know you should be doing for an ultimate longer term goal, instead of taking something called instant gratification for a short term win. So for example, the easiest one to relate is fitness based. So if I say, oh, I don't want to go for a run, or I don't want to go to the gym, and instead I'm going to eat 9,000 cupcakes, then that's obviously instant gratification because it tastes really good now, but tomorrow or even later, I'm going to feel like shit. Then tomorrow I'm going to be fatter. I don't know if you guys can hear that. And as a result, instead of delaying my gratification and saying I'm going to go to the gym now and improve my life in a week's time because I'm fitter, faster, stronger, I'm actually eating cake, and it tastes all right for 10 minutes, but then after that I feel shit. That's the difference. And you can extrapolate that all the way back to jobs, income, business, investing, and sports betting as well. So if we're saying, okay, we're going to try and win 100K this season, I could say, okay, I'm going to try and and we have a bankroll of 10K. I'm going to put 10K on one event at 10 to 1. Because if I do it, then great. But the likelihood of that happening, very short. And the risk of it, just ridiculous, obviously. So how to avoid these things? Obviously, bankroll management is the one. Bankroll management is the one. It's so important. Whatever your bankroll is, I don't care if it's like £100, just start doing it properly, because when you scale up, obviously I've spoken to a few people about the long-term goals of the company in this regards. Once it really starts getting going, we make 40 units a season on part-time. Imagine what happens when I actually have more than, an hour a day to spend on this. Because I prefer this business model, and yeah, it's just going to be very powerful. So stick around, and if you have good bankroll management, you can make a fuck ton of money. And it's more how you live your life when you have it, because obviously money is important, but you could probably make more money going and working as a financial analyst, or opening up a business and working 15 hours a day. But do you want to do that? What's your goals? Do you want to be a digital nomad? Do you want to travel the world? Do you want to, whatever it is, just decide that first. So yeah, that's it. I got a few more topics for next time. Might do a little Q&A potentially later tonight as well. Just when a lot more American people are online, so we can try and get into double figures of viewers would be nice. Potentially around insider trading of sports betting, if that's an interesting topic anyone would kind of like. Cool. All right. So yeah, I might do that later tonight with like a little Q&A if anybody wants any questions, because it would be good to get some more communication, get like 10, 20 people on one of these. I think we would have to do it at Eastern time though, because obviously 90% of the following is American based. So yeah, if anyone has any questions now, just shoot me in a message. Yeah. I think how I'm talking about it is going to be a little bit different to how you think about it. But I don't know, expand, shoot me a message if you have some more data on it, because I'm not talking about like match fixing or anything as such. I'm talking about more legal insider trading and how it relates to the stock market. So stock markets, obviously, if you have data about a company, so the CEO is going to get fired before he gets fired, and that CEO is incredible, and that will reduce the stock price, then you can short that market and make such a low risk couple of $1 million, or tens of millions if you're a big hedge fund, on a 10%, 15% decrease in stock price. And that you kind of, yeah, it's illegal insider trading in stock markets. But when it comes to sports betting, insider trading isn't tracked, and it kind of isn't really a thing. The main reason why it's not a thing is because you can still lose the event. So the reason why gambling is not taxed in the UK, or at least not for now, is because even games like poker and sports betting are seen as games of luck, 100%, so no skill involved. So, and the reason for that is because you can't try and lose unless obviously you raise, and then fold when you have one chip left. But physically, you couldn't lose if you tried to lose. Because let's say you go all in with 2-7, yeah? And the other person has aces. You can still win. Proportionally, to do that 100 times, nigh on impossible. But officially, when it comes to the law, you can still technically win. So that's why it's classed as gambling. Obviously, same with roulette. If you try and lose, but you can't guarantee yourself that you're going to lose, then it's viewed upon differently in the UK anyway. I'm not sure about anywhere else. But yeah. But yeah, there's 4 people here. So if anyone else has any questions, just let me know. Any picks for today? That's all you guys want, isn't it? I'm just having a look now. There will be though, because the card's quite long, isn't it? Yeah, nothing right now, but I will be doing a full analysis around 4 o'clock UK time. But yeah, again, so the problem I was saying before is, if we have a day that has 12, 13 games on, and you have a minor edge system, so you take a play on, let's say, one game, and you have 13 units on the line, and you use, this is obviously if you're following someone else, but you use our bankroll management techniques, then you're going to have like 13, potentially 26% of your bankroll on one day. And although it's very unlikely you're going to either win all of them or lose all of them, that's still way too high. The exposure is just too high. So yeah, that's everything. I will give you a is it? I haven't seen that yet. Who are they playing? Caps. Oh, I actually might take the under in that. So Billy, you're in Germany, so I'm not sure what time that would be. I think you're an hour behind me, maybe 2 hours. So I'm 4, 5-ish UK time. So maybe 6, 7-ish your time. Okay, so you're an hour. So yeah, about 5, 6-ish your time. Probably 6-ish. Sweet. All right, I'm going to head off. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.